What's up, Fathom Church, and welcome to the Going Deeper podcast. This is your host, Kyle Knight, and I'm here with Karina Bost. Hello, Karina.
Hello.
And Chris Martin. Hello, Chris.
Buenos dias,
Buenos
senor.
dias. Buenos dias. We're back to Spanish. You've made the full circle of all the languages you know. We're back
I want
to
you
Spanish.
to learn hello in Swahili.
Ooh.
Task for next time.
Do you remember hello in Thai?
I don't.
Sawadee-ka.
There you go.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
There you go.
No, I'm not going to do that.
We're just gonna
I'm going
have
to just keep.
Karina
I'm going to
say hello every
stay
time.
with my Spanish.
Okay, well, hey, welcome. In this episode, you can see that we've titled this episode Financial Peace University. This is going to sort of kind of be in connection with Chris's last sermon this past Sunday in 1 Timothy chapter 6. We're going to talk about a little bit about Financial Peace University. Chris announced that we're going to be doing this as a church, and so you have the opportunity to sign up for this class and everything, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But we really want to talk about this whole idea of a Christian's relationship with money. We've talked about money on this podcast before, but I think there's more to that in this text that we just went over on Sunday, and we want to look at it kind of all encompassing and from a Christian's perspective on how we steward our money well, and a lot of different questions when it comes to being rich, being wealthy, what to do with our money. Are certain things okay, not okay to do with it? But that's kind of what we're going to talk about. We're going to cover kind of a lot of ground with that today. But let's start with, as we were kind of chatting before we hit record, sort of about our experiences with money growing up. You've all kind of heard about our backgrounds a little bit and how we're all a little bit different on where we kind of came from. So we're going to talk a little bit about like what that looked like in our households growing up with money, with how we were directed to steward our money or not, and the priority that kind of took and what we kind of learned from maybe our parents or other people in our family. So Karina, maybe we'll start with you. Just give us a little insight about what it was like growing up in your family, some of the things you learned about money, about your Christian's relationship with money, if that was important to you. Just give us a little insight on that.
Yeah, so growing up, being a pastor's kid in rural Colorado, we did not have very much money. And so I don't remember as a kid having much money. I knew that the principle of I knew we should tithe what part of what we had back to God, but it wasn't something I had ever practiced or experienced much of as a kid. And then Kevin and I got married very young, and we were kind of, my parents had moved to Thailand, and we were kind of on our own. And we did not make great financial decisions, mostly because we didn't have the finances to make good financial decisions, but also we just weren't educated enough. We just didn't know. And so we were kind of figuring it out as we went along. And that is not a method I would recommend. It is amazing how far those ripples of poor financial decisions early in life, how far they stretch into your adulthood.
Yeah.
That's why this conversation is so important. Because we have people who are starting out, as families and making financial decisions, or even people who maybe have been in the battle a long time and just trying to figure it out and thinking they're beyond hope. But I don't think that is true.
Very interesting. Okay. Well, I mean, so not being raised in the church, that doesn't necessarily impact too much of the financial conversation, although it does play into the generosity side of things. Like, I've made it really clear that I never really tithed until I got married to Marcy. Now she had that kind of built into her through her family and upbringing. But for me, just the idea of giving money away other than just like when I felt bad, or, if there's like some sort of guilt plea that's like, oh, I just want to help that person out or help that cause out. But it was never this idea, like when we talk Christian generosity, of like cheerful, regular, sacrificial giving. That was never a part of my experience until I got married. But I would say that we were upper middle class growing up. We had what we needed. My dad was more of a saver and more of a thrifty kind of guy. My mom was very much a spender and not nearly as, tight-fisted as my dad. So I kind of saw both sides. It's funny. I think I was more like my mom in that, like, if I got allowance or like made money, it burnt a hole in my pocket before it could even get in there. I mean, it was like, as soon as I had money, I was spending it, whether that was like as an elementary school kid, as on baseball cards and basketball cards and like candy and junk, or even a high schooler on just Chipotle and like eating out and going out with friends and stuff. Like, I just could not save. My brother, on the other hand, was, at least in those formative years, was a lot more like my dad, a lot more thrifty, a lot more frugal with his money, and was able to save more. But then, yeah, when we got into, there was a couple of things for Marcy and I that just marked our story. First of all, we both came out of undergrad without school debt, which was a huge gift from our families. It's not every family that is able to do that, but that was something that, coming out of undergrad without school debt was a huge blessing, benefit, and it just kind of set us up in some ways that, had we had to take out, $50,000+ in student loans, that would have been a different story for the beginning of our marriage and our finances. Additionally, neither of us used credit cards in college, and so we didn't have any unnecessary debt either coming out of school. So in some ways, we were set up to make good decisions. We weren't put in a poor position in some ways. But at the same moment, we did make good decisions financially. But like I said in my sermon, that none of that, even if you've made good decisions, there's still pieces of finance that elude us. There are still pieces of finance that like retirement and investments and insurance and like things that are actually an important piece of financial piece that nobody really trains you on unless you've got really intentional, really dialed in family and friends and even classes for these sorts of things. So I feel like we were set up pretty well to succeed, and we also made some really good decisions. But we still, until recently, haven't really dialed it into the level that I feel comfortable with. So yeah, that's our background.
Yeah. And mine's, kind of a mixture of both of y'all's. Growing up in a household where, my parents both worked and did very well for like our family, and money wasn't really an issue. We learned a lot, I think, from just observing my parents and, seeing what they spent their money on, what they saved on, how hard they worked and everything like that. I remember, what I don't remember is, like, we didn't talk too much about my parents tithing or what that meant. We also didn't talk about that in our church kind of growing up. That wasn't really like a thing for like young people to like really learn what it means to tithe to your church. And so as I got older, like that became more reality, Chris. When I got married too, and went through some premarital counseling with you.
Hey,
so
it's all paying off.
Here's a plug for Chris to do your premarital counseling.
I do a lot of that.
I don't think you need any plugs for that because we have enough people that come
quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, the tithing thing wasn't a thing that we talked about, but I knew my parents did because they were very faithful to their church. And so then, but money wise, like we were I feel like I was kind of in the middle. Like we didn't talk too much about money, but my parents made sure we were smart with it. Like getting our first jobs, we would get our own bank accounts and our own like debit cards that had money from like our own jobs, and we were free to spend that money. I think I was also kind of like you, Chris. Like I would just spend my money when I got my money as a teenager, because that's kind of what you do as a teen. You want to work a job to get a few extra bucks to buy some food. So it wasn't going through college, same as you, Chris. Like we were, like me and Jackie, like we were set up to set up very well after college, and once we like met each other and going into marriage and everything. And so I think as of now, like we're okay with our money. I am not, and I'll say that, like, I'm not the best when it comes to not in the sense of like spending stuff, but like I just don't get money stuff that much. I'm just kind of like Jackie's really good with money.
Cool.
And so she's the one that budgets for us and keeps us on track. And I praise God for that. She's awesome for that. And so she has that gifting, and that comes from her side of the family, and her dad instilled that in her, and her parents did too. And she's kind of run with that her whole life, and she's been very responsible for that. And so yeah, she's the one who kind of keeps us going. But there is, like, as of now, when talking about this financial piece, like we're thinking about, and most likely we'll take this class too, because there's always stuff that I want to learn more about how to steward my money better. Cause I just don't understand this stuff a lot of the times. And I'm like, man, I just don't get it. I don't know what God wants me to do with my money. I don't like what's the best thing to do with it? What is like, so I am always like, as of right now, like I think me and Jackie are like, we would love to learn more about how to just have a better relationship with our money and what God would want us to do with our money. So yeah, that's kind of where I feel like I'm kind of in the middle, but
yeah, that's good.
Stuff.
Karina, are you, with you and Kevin, is one of you a saver and one of you a spender?
Yes.
You don't have to tell us who. That's fine. That's fine. Unless you want to, but
you smiled at that.
And then is like one of you better with money and one of you like just kind of hands off? Like, is there one hand on, one hands off kind of?
Yeah, we have learned that it works better in our marriage for one of us to do the finances. Yeah, and it's just been through, like, because we started off so poorly that like we really learned a lot as we grew. And so now we just understand like every single dollar that comes into our house is accounted for in some sort of way.
Yeah.
And so, which is super helpful to know where your money's going.
Yeah.
And I can look 2 years in the future and know exactly like where that's going. So it is helpful to budget and to plan.
Right.
And like I said, in our family, it works better for one of us to do it. It's just keeps it more clear.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let's talk then about like the Bible and Christians and money, because I think there's a lot that the word says about wealth and money and riches, and also like poverty and giving and generosity. And so let me just pose some questions and we can kind of bounce around, and if scriptures come to mind, we can quote them, or we can even just say, isn't there a scripture that says, like, we don't have to exactly have verse and chapter on this, but is it okay for a Christian to be rich? Let's ask that question.
I think instantly, I mean, everyone will think of the example Jesus gave about it's harder for a Christian to enter heaven than for a camel to go through a needle's eye, something like that, right?
Yep.
And so I think that's a warning. Like, I don't think that's saying that wealthy people can't be Christians. But I think that there is something to be said about like money leads to greed. Like money can create all kinds of problems. So you can't love money and love God. It says that also in the Bible, that if you love one, you'll hate the other, and vice versa. So
yeah, I think when maybe a lot of people, maybe it's just me, hear that question first, I think I automatically think, and maybe this is from growing up in a Christian house, like, oh, rich, like, no, you can't be rich, because there is so much scripture about like, oh, God saying like, give your possessions away, like give things to the poor, like everything like that. And so I feel like in the back of my head, I have this negative connotation with that of like, no, a Christian can't be rich because you need to be giving your money away. And now we could talk about rich and other things, but we're talking about money today. Yep. And so part of me goes, well, no, a Christian can't be rich, because I feel like if a Christian is making a lot of money, like I don't think it's a problem at all to have a job where you're making a lot of money as a Christian. Part of me is like, well, then you should be giving tons of that away so that you are not, quote unquote, rich. And then you see verses like, Chris, you just preached on this weekend about like the lover of money and like all this kind of stuff. And Karina, you just hinted at that too, that it's like, I think there's a difference between being rich and like having wealth and having money and being in love with it, that you keep it to yourself, that you're like, I'm going to keep this to myself. I am rich. My family is rich, and I love it, and I want more of it, and all that kind of stuff, rather than like, yeah, I can consider myself rich comparative to other people. Like, I'm blessed with that, but you can still be giving that away. So I feel like from growing up and reading scripture, it's like, oh, rich is bad. Like, you can't be rich and be a Christian because all these things, you can't be like, oh, money is bad, I guess. But reading the text is like, yeah, being a lover of money, like Karina said, if you put that up there as an idol or whatever like that, then that becomes a problem.
Well, I think you guys you're right on these things, because one, there are warnings about money. Matthew says, store up not for yourself treasures on earth, but rather treasures in heaven. Right. So that's a warning about amassing earthly treasure as opposed to investing in the kingdom. You mentioned the rich young ruler idea where, Jesus says, sell everything you have and give it all to the poor. The text says that the rich young ruler walked away disheartened because he had a great deal of wealth. And that's when Jesus says it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than it is for a camel to go through the eye of the needle. But with God, with man, this is impossible. With God, all things are possible. Right. So there's that warning. And then there's again, back to, I think it was Matthew 6 is the store for yourselves treasures in heaven instead of treasures on earth. That's also where, Jesus says you cannot serve two masters, right? So that idea of like serving two masters, or what I talked about in 1 Timothy 6, that you can't love, like the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So I think there's great warnings, and there's also rich people all through the scriptures, like who follow God. I mean, Solomon, the richest man ever, right? I mean, there are rich Christ followers in the New Testament. So we have these ideas that seem to be in juxtaposition of one another, right? One says wealth is a pitfall that you need to be really careful of. And then the other says, and there are some who can do it, like who can somehow manage wealth without falling into the pit of self-reliance and pride and, that kind of thing. Yeah. So I heard one guy say that that Christians are allowed to be rich, but they're not allowed to live like it. I thought that was an interesting way to think about it. That like you can be rich, like actually by all measures, you should work as unto the Lord and try to grow what you can earn and what you can, even like interest and, compounding interest and all these like really good things that help you amass wealth, but for the purpose, not of just leveling up your lifestyle all the time, but for the more that you earn, if you're a kingdom centered Christian, like you can give like crazy, like you can support gospel patronage is a real thing. Yeah. There are missionaries who need rich people to support them. There are churches that need to be planted because of, and they, we would not have been able to plant Fathom without generous patrons who gave tens of thousands of dollars to see this thing happen. So I do think that wealth is a pitfall that needs to be warned about. And I think there are ways to be rich and be generous in that richness without essentially living rich. You can be rich, but you can't live like it. I think that's maybe a helpful way to think about wealth. But then let's talk about the other swing then, because I think the pendulum will swing away from that towards poverty, right? Yeah. This idea that like, well, then if it's really hard for Christians to be rich, should all Christians just take a vow of poverty? Like, is that Is that what we're called to do? What do you guys, blessed are the poor in spirit, but you know, like what do you do with that, you guys?
Yeah, I mean, you brought up an interesting point that it takes money to do the mission of God. Like missionaries are generally supported by other Christians. The church is supported by Christians. And I'm not going to, I mean, I grew up without money, and in my lifetime, I saw God do insane things because we didn't have money. So it's not like you can discredit that God works in those situations, but I think it was because we were poor, not because we were seeking to be poor. And I think there's a difference. It's kind of like the same thing. Like, I'm working to earn money for me, but you can also work to be poor for whatever illusions that you have, that's how God's going to work in you. So yeah, I think, and I've heard people point to like crazy examples, and I think there are very, very rare instances where God does call people into places where it's like completely faith. But I think that's not the rule.
Right.
And that's not how he works. And it's like, you know, anyways, that's a different side trail.
What do you think, Kyle?
Yeah. It makes me think of just hard work. One of the verses that always comes to mind is that Colossians 3 verse that says, "Work whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men." And in this First Timothy section that you just preached on, growing up, and this is the perspective I had on this, that we hear a few times in scripture that like you cannot take anything out of this world. And I think I remember growing up thinking of that, like, oh, well, everything we have here, we can't take with us or whatever like that. And so I think that can kind of be a slippery slope in the sense of that could make somebody think of that going, well, you know, none of my work here matters. Nothing that I get here matters. So I'm just not going to, and that can fall into laziness or whatever it is, and not still working hard, whether it's for money or for whatever. You see a lot of people who have jobs that you wouldn't consider like, oh, you're getting paid a lot of money, like you are quote unquote rich. Maybe you're just getting by, but you're doing well for yourself, but they absolutely love their job and they love what they do and they work really hard for it, for God. They're just not rich. And so I see that and I kind of go, okay, I think those people are kind of taking that, being like, yeah, I'm not taking any of what I have with me. You know, this is what I have, but I'm still going to work hard in it. And so, but I do think that can be a little bit of a slippery slope for some people of like, well, since I can't take anything, then I'm just not going to do anything. And that falls into other kind of sin or not stewarding other things well, and even just the work that God gives you or whatever that is. And so I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing but those verses always stuck out to me of like you can't take things. Remember, you can't take things with you. And so, well, maybe I just won't do anything then, and I won't work for it, and I don't really care what I have, you know?
Okay. So I agree with you guys. Like, I think while there will be at times some who are called with a special call towards a life of poverty for the sake of the gospel, just like there are some who are called for a life of singleness for the sake of the gospel. Right. It is not commanded of everyone. You know, the rich young ruler, sell everything you have and give it to the poor, is not a commandment prescription for all to follow. Right. Okay. That's Jesus needling at this one man's idol, which is his self-sufficient wealth. But, so if it's not that, if we are not all called to poverty, but there are warnings about wealth and riches, though that is not a sin in and of itself, there's just pitfalls to be aware of with wealth and riches. Or maybe the question is more, are Christians allowed to have nice things and like go on vacations and like, what is a responsible Christian relationship with not just give us today our daily bread, monetary existence, but everything above a need when you move into wants, when you move into, excess, even if it's a little bit of excess, anything over what you need to survive, is it okay for a Christian to enjoy things, go on a ski trip, take a cruise, buy a nice car? Like what do we do? What do we do with those actual, like, real life tangible categories of stuff that a Christian might spend some of their riches or wealth on?
It's a good question. Where I stand on that is, do I think all that stuff is wrong? No, I don't. I think it comes back to kind of what we said with like a lot of our topics on this podcast. It's a heart issue. It's a wisdom issue. It's a what you spend your money on kind of thing. We talked about, did we talk about gambling already on this podcast or something like that?
Yep.
Yeah. We've talked about gambling. We've talked about the ways that probably are not healthy and not good ways to steward the money that God has given you, and kind of throwing that away or throwing it to chance, those sorts of things. But I do believe that, like, God wants us to enjoy ourselves, to have a joyful life. And I think part of that is working hard and kind of reaping the benefits of your hard work, and, man, like, doing vacations with family and that kind of stuff, and having joy in that, and like creating memories. And I think it comes down to a heart issue on what you are using your money for. If it's something that obviously is not honoring to God, or is you're throwing it away, then that's whole other issues on that. But I think, like, nice things here and there, I think God wants us to enjoy the fruits kind of our labor too here on earth.
And I think a big thing to consider too is, like, are you being generous? If you are doing all these nice things and taking vacations at the expense of being generous, I mean, we know that we are supposed to be generous because the Bible is filled with verses that call us to be generous. So it's like, are you replacing your generosity with, like, self-indulgence? That's one thing to consider. And it just is also an interesting point, because I think the modern world has created a lot more idle time than they probably had 2,000 years ago. So we have a lot more time that we feel like, oh yeah, like, I need a vacation because I have time. I have vacation time,
Right, sure.
and those kinds of things. But I mean, I think every family knows, I mean, like, that's why we have budgets, because we know, like, how generous am I being? How generous are we? And is this or that? And then something my aunt told me, who, she's not a believer, so this is really fascinating, but she always said, like, if a $50 purse will work, like, why do you need a $2,000 purse? I'm not like slamming, like, but it's like this, we have made really nice things that generally stand as, look at my purse because I have money. And it's like this status that you want people to know money, like, you have money. And once again, like you said, Kyle, it comes down to heart issues. And so maybe you can have a $2,000 purse and it be nothing. Or I just, maybe it was a gift. I don't know. I don't want to think too much into it, but what my aunt said is true. Sometimes we get carried away with the value of something because we think it makes us look good, or we want people to notice, where it's like, yes, I can go to Target and buy a purse that serves the same function. Yeah,
it's interesting stuff, because I think we would all, not all, but I think the three of us would say a lifestyle of opulence is probably not what a Christian is best should strive for. But even in that, it's a variable, like, it's a sliding scale, because maybe a $50 purse is opulent for some, as opposed to a gallon Ziploc bag where you can store your junk, right? Like, I mean, there's always this sliding scale of what is nice and what is practical and what is luxury and what is opulent. And so I think you're right, Kyle. I think it comes back a lot to motive. I really appreciate, Karina, what you said about what am I trying to, like, is this a status symbol for me? So you guys know I run. I'm not a runner, right? We've made that really clear. I run. Runners have shorts with slits up to their hip. That's just how it is.
Please don't become a runner.
Yeah, I run. Yeah. But good running shoes aren't cheap. Like I spend more than $100 on a pair of running shoes. And now I can run 500 miles in a pair of running shoes. And they really do. I don't think I'm ever thinking, wow, I bet people look at me and think I'm really fast in these shoes. Like I genuinely don't think it's a status symbol, although I'll admit that there are other purchases that I've made that are definitely status symbols. And that's more of like okay, I need to check my heart on some of that stuff. But $100 on a pair of sneakers it's insane. And it's what, like I do it. Yeah. So is that wrong?
Well, my dad would say, so we didn't have money, but he did spend money on shoes for all of us.
Yeah.
But it's because he had an Achilles problem and the Achilles surgery was way more than he would have spent on 10 years of good shoes. So it is one of those things that's like, part of it is that the science has allowed shoes to take care of our bodies better.
Well, and I do think coming back again to what another thing you said, Kyle, is it's okay to enjoy things, right? Like a good drink, a good meal, a good vacation, whatever it might be, whatever your recreation, your hobby is, like none of those things are wrong. I do think the motive matters. So like asking your questions around like, is this about my identity? Is this about feeling good about myself? Is this about status? Like, I think those questions, some soul searching is really important. The second piece that you talked about, Karina, is how generous am I? Because I meet a lot of people who actually, by the way, I meet most people. I bet you if we were to poll our church, most people would think that they are very generous. Very few people don't think they're generous. Very few people think that they're greedy. Like I've done ministry for almost 20 years full time in the church. I've had a lot of people who have come to me saying, I'm struggling with lust. I have had nobody who has come to me and said, I'm struggling with greed. I just keep way too much of my money and spend it on myself. Pastor, help me. I mean, not one conversation ever have I had. I have dozens and dozens of conversations a year with help me beat lust. I've never had anybody say, help me beat greed, which is fascinating because those are sins, both of them. But most people think that they're generous. I made a really generous gift. Okay. Like they almost sometimes can boast in generosity and things like that. And so there's part of me that would say, okay, what's your motive as to justify, as it were, your lifestyle? But then also, what does your generosity say about what you really love and worship? Because what you give to your first and best, like we say every Sunday, is really your God. And I wonder if you give your first and best to you or you give your first and best to Jesus. And I mean, and listen, you don't need to feel any guilt from me. I'm just asking the question around that because I think it's okay to have $100 running shoes as long as you are giving first and best to Christ. I think it's okay to go on a cruise as long as you're giving first and best to Jesus. Now, well, what's first and best? I'm not going to be a legalist on this, but it better be first and it better be best. And like every person has to be honest with themselves about their motives and about their generosity in order to make me feel like, okay, yeah, so drive that car, $40,000 car. Great. That's okay. Yeah, you can do that because you gave X amount of dollars. You invest what God has given you in the kingdom. And so just because you're in a higher tax bracket doesn't mean you need to, drive a 86 Corolla, I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's important to hear that as I think your first and your best is really important to hear that, because I think if you're giving your first and your best, whether that's tithing or to a different organization or whatever it is, you're being generous with your first and your best. Then I feel like when the next thing comes, that it's like, I have this money that I've worked for. I can take a trip or be generous again. We're not saying it always has to fall in, like, if there's one or the other, you got to pick generous. You got to pick generous, because if you're doing your first and your best and you're giving your first and your best, the next time that comes on, I think you can be like, oh yeah, I'm giving my first and my best. I can enjoy it, trip or something. Well, I don't need to always be like,
and I don't want to move totally into like this big push for Financial Peace University, but there is something that's really interesting here. So I said in the sermon, Marcy and I took Financial Peace this year because we're getting a scholarship for Harper to come to school at Front Range. And I went in thinking, this is going to be so dumb. Like, we're in a decent financial position. Like, why would I need to take Financial Peace University? Well, I took it, and one of the things that you get as a part of the class, if you take the class with us, you get this too, is a year access to their app, which is called the Every Dollar app, which is just a budgeting app that syncs with your banks and really just helps you look at all of the dollars that you're spending. Literally what you were saying, Karina, like, where does every dollar that comes in go out? And it's helpful because for Marcy and I, we're pretty good with money. And we still realized there's probably $200 or $300 that we're being a little frivolous with, that we could be more intentional with. That was really helpful. But one of the really cool things is that the app will track your categories of your budget and show you percentage-wise where you're spending the most money down to the least amount of money by category. And it was just an affirming thing for Marcy and I to look at after a few months of using it, seeing, okay, the biggest chunk of money that we spend every month is on our house. Like, the biggest chunk of percentage wise of our take home dollars is on, mortgage and insurance and just, essentially existing as suburbanites who own a home. The second biggest chunk is food. Food is really stinking expensive. And it's like, I didn't realize it until I watched how much we spend at King Soopers. And I was like, dang. But then our third category is giving. Like, if we look at our budget and we bring home X amount of dollars, the biggest chunk goes to our house. The second biggest chunk goes to food. The third biggest chunk doesn't go to fun, doesn't go to vacations, doesn't go to, entertainment. It doesn't go to restaurants. It doesn't go to whatever, recreation. The third biggest chunk goes to generosity. A lot of that goes to the church, but there's a lot that goes to other places. And I'm not saying that to toot my horn as much as I'm saying, like, I think that's probably what you should look at. I mean, if you're asking the question, am I generous enough? Am I giving first and best? Now, officially, like, should I give more than I spend on my house? Well, I don't know. I mean, we're not in that financial availability to do that. But I think it should be up there. Like, I think if you're looking at the categories of what you're spending your money on, I don't care how much you make. I think a big chunk should be in generosity.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
I don't know. I mean, that might be a bit legalistic of me to even say. I don't want that to sound legalistic, but I really want to say, I think you'll know if you're generous if it's in those top few categories for your family budget.
Well, and it comes out of that heart posture. Like, that's where it can become legalistic, right? Like, I'm just giving for the sake of giving to check off that box, which is so easy to fall into. Right. But like, giving is an act of worship. Yeah. And if we stand there with open hands posture, and that's where sometimes it's like, hey, you were planning on going on vacation, but God is really urging you towards this thing. Yeah. And sometimes it is like that obedience in giving and generosity at the sake of our own experience or whatever. And that doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes it does. And we just have to be really aware of, like, hey, I'm going to pray about this. I'm going to seek counsel about this. And
I think that's super wise to actually think about those things and to ask those questions. I mean, I'm not saying you don't go on vacation. I'm just saying you probably shouldn't spend more on vacation this year than you did on being generous.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm trying to think of a scenario where it's like, well, it might be. No, I don't think you should.
Yep.
I mean, that might be, again, me making sweeping statements, which is what pastors do. But I just think so that was one of the things as we made our budget. It's like, oh, we really want our giving to be one of the biggest buckets of what we spend our money on.
Mm-hmm.
And we want that bucket to keep growing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to spend more money on my house.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really want to spend more money on food, although, who knows how groceries are going to go up. Like, you can't control that, but I want to grow that giving piece. Like, as we get raises, as we get, more money, the question shouldn't just be like, how can we increase our lifestyle? The question should be like, and how can we give more?
Mm-hmm.
Where can we invest in God's kingdom more?
Yeah. And I think when Kevin and I, for his job, vacations are really important, but in order to keep our budget in that right order, we had to evaluate, like, if this is important. That's like part of the reason we cut out eating out, because in order to focus on vacations, it meant that we didn't have money to splurge if we wanted to keep that balance appropriate. Right. And so we had to sit down and look at our budget and be real critical on, like, where is all of our money going? And because it's really easy to just lose track of $300, $400, $500. Yeah,
real quick.
Well, and I think it's important too, like, you brought up this whole legalism piece, that if people are listening and being like, well, you're going to push too far into the legalistic piece of money and generosity and all this kind of stuff. All of what you were saying made me think of even just anything else besides money in your life that you value. And we always say, like you can see what you value in your life by what you, like, spend your time, energy, all that kind of stuff, focus on those top 3 things or whatever throughout the day, whatever you spend the most time on, whatever, those are the things you value the most. And it's like, so that just kept coming up in my head of like it can be money stuff. It could be looking at that. If you do Financial Peace University, of that app and seeing where generosity falls on there. But yeah, to me, it just looks at, it makes me want to do that, to be like, what do I value in my life? And is generosity up there? Is spending time with others up there? Is doing, like, are there things up there that should not be, that I'm putting way more value that isn't maybe a house or food or something like that, but it's something else that I'm like, why is that even the heck up there? Those are some reasons why I and my wife too want to take a class like this, is because it shines that light out. Like, you need that stuff in your life to be like, I want to make sure that that I'm valuing the right things. And then, and money is a huge part of this, of your life here on this earth, and what you do with that money. I mean, that's a big piece. So I'm all for this. Do you want to give any other information on Financial Peace?
Let's plug that out, and then we can call this. But I think, so starting in, I think it's the 3rd week of January, after church on Sundays. So from like 11 to 1. Yeah. So let's say 11 to 1, we're going to do Financial Peace University here in the church office. So you don't have to go anywhere. There will be childcare available. It does cost money. So the class normally costs $100. It's a 9-week class. But we've bought license for our church, and we're only going to charge $50 for a person or for a couple. So $50 total. And I understand that some people are like, oh, I don't have $50. I get it. But we really, you need to buy into this thing. And so a little skin in the game, I think, is really important. But understanding that, here's what we'll say. We want you to give us $50. But if you come to 8 out of 9 classes and you go through the whole thing with us, we'll give you your $50 back. Like, at the end of it, if now you don't have, I hope that some people will take their $50 back and drop it right in the offering box, right? Like, I think that I'm just telling you from personal experience, it's worth it. But I would love for you guys to join us. We'll take as many couples as we can. We have 4 moderators. So myself and Eric Shelley, 2 elders who are going to moderate, but then we have 2 other people from our church, members of our church, who are in personal finance, investment, and in insurance. So we have coaches who can actually help you with certain pieces. And that's the idea, is that in community, we would take this big piece seriously. I mean, Jesus talks about money a lot. It's a big deal. And we don't want to fall to one side or to the other. And so I think this is a good tool. This class is a good tool to help us gain some financial peace. So sign up, fathomchurch.org/info. There's a button there that says FPU. Please sign up for that. And yeah, we look forward to 2025 and hopefully getting a good grasp on our relationship with money as Christians.
Yeah. And I think this is good. A good way to serve our church too. Like I've already heard of a bunch of people in the church being like, this is awesome. Like I want to sign up for this. This is a great thing that we're doing. And hopefully it serves some of you who are listening to this. So sign up for that.
Love it.
Hey, thank you guys for
good times
stuff.
Let's go spend some money. Money.
And with that, we're done.